Every year, as I've talked about with other prospects, there are those guys that just really leap off to me on the film, and they're the guys that I really, really get enamored with their game and thinking about what they can do at the NFL level. The type of guys that I would want my team, the Chicago Bears, to draft because of what they bring to the table. And one of the guys that fits into that category for me is Justin Hardy from East Carolina. Here's a guy that I've been watching for a while now. Here's a guy that does a lot of things that I think really, really make him one of those unheralded type of prospects when it comes to this year's NFL draft. And unfortunately, he shouldn't be, because I think he should be viewed as a more legitimate prospect and be given more credit for who he is than what he has been so far. And I guess when it comes to the NFL draft, we'll see how much respect there is for his game in terms of where he ultimately ends up getting selected. But when I look at Justin Hardy's game, what is there for me to like coming out of East Carolina? To me, he was a proven productive four-year player. He got better each and every single year, but always found a way to produce. He was a guy that could be counted on. He had consistent effort in all areas as a route runner, as a pass catcher, as a guy that would be willing to go and block. I mean, he's a really good blocker. For a guy that's not all that big, you'd be surprised by just how willing and effective he is as a blocker, whether outside or in the slot. That's the type of thing for a guy of his size that lacks that big 6'4", 6'5" frame that you don't always expect to see. But, man, he really could do it. He's a guy that also has really good, consistent hands. It was rare that I saw Justin Hardy drop a pass, especially over the last 2 years at East Carolina. Here's a guy that brings something else to the table. Here's a guy that could be at least a solid, effective punt returner. He might not be the most explosive type of guy. When you're talking about things that you can bring to a table and things that can help your draft stock, he does have some special teams abilities. He does have some proven track record as a punt returner. Here's a guy that, to me, when I look at his game, though, as a receiver, the two things that really stand out the most, even more so than his consistent effort, even more so than his great hands and his consistent hands, is the fact that he's able to consistently get separation. Here's a guy, to me, that as I've watched him in particular over the last 2 years, it seemed like he was always open. Every play he was open. And a lot of times, again, without great speed or quickness, he was able to get open by a good margin, suggesting that he's a really good route runner. He's explosive, at least in and out of his breaks, and has that ability to get open, which is critical at the NFL level. And he's also a threat to gain yards after the catch, too, without being the most explosive, without being the quickest or the fastest. This is a guy that is good with the yards after the catch. He can rack up the yak, if you will. So why aren't more people talking about him? It's more than just the small school stuff. Why is it that he's not being talked about as a top 8 or 10 wide receiver in this class? Well, there are a few things. He lacks the size of a typical outside wide receiver. And similar to, let's say, a Rashad Green, who I talked about before, he lacks that great speed of a smaller guy that you would want. He's not the biggest, he's not the fastest, he's not the quickest or most explosive. So there's some question about how you would equate his abilities to the NFL level, how his game would translate, because he won't have the ability to, be physical against man press coverage and really dominate. He won't be a guy that could just get open with sheer quickness, explosiveness, and speed. You also look at him, too. He wasn't really much of a big play threat at East Carolina. He was a reliable weapon, but reliable doesn't mean exceptional. He's not a guy that's going to make a shit ton of big plays for you. He's not a guy that's going to make a lot of wow plays. He's just a guy that makes a lot of consistent plays. And when you're talking about taking receivers in the first 2 rounds, especially in a really good draft class like this one for wide receivers, again, like last year, solid is nice, but it's not spectacular. And a lot of teams are going to look at spectacular traits over solid traits, whether or not they should. He has an average ability to win jump balls, and at the NFL level, that's something that's important. You have to be able to adjust to the ball. You have to be able to go get the ball at its highest point, and that's something he was okay at, but it's not necessarily a strength of his game. I also have some concerns, too, about not only his level of competition that he played in at East Carolina, but more so the fact that the system that he played in may have created a lot of his opportunities and may have allowed him to get the type of consistent separation that he got, to get as open as he was, as often as he was. I think in some ways that was because of the type of routes he was asked run, the type of system that they played in with a guy in Shane Carden who had kind of a limp noodle arm, frankly, if you will. So I have some concerns about his game. When I look at an NFL comparison, though, for Justin Hardy, you really know who I see? Goes back a little bit. I see Hines Ward. I see a guy that is incredibly reliable as a pass catcher, a guy that makes all the solid plays, even if he doesn't make the spectacular plays. Here's a guy that seems to consistently be able to get open. Most importantly of all, I look at Justin Hardy, and he always has presented himself to me as a guy that is a really good leader both on the field and in the locker room. A guy that gives consistent max effort all the time, a guy with some special team skills, a guy that is a really good blocker, and that is something that could be an MO for him at the NFL level. You know, similar to a Hines Ward that once was a third-round pick, that's kind of what I envision for a Justin Hardy, a guy that is a third to fourth-round pick and the type of mid-round pick that ends up being a really productive player for a franchise for the next 10 to 12 years. One of those locker room favorites and one of those fan favorites as well because of the effort that he brings to the table.